The Garden Report, just a couple weeks till training camp. So we're going to get into some of the biggest Celtics questions. I got a center conversation, film, debate, breakdown thing coming down on who might start alongside Kristaps Porzingis. I've put an article up on it on CLNSmedia.com, but I want to bounce around the East a little bit too as camp begins, and I've been meaning to do a Heat show since the Damian Lillard trade talks started and stalled, and appear at a standstill for now. And Wes Goldberg's back, great friend of the show here. Last talked to you before Game 7, which went in a direction I don't think either of us saw going, whether you thought the Heat were going to win or not. It just ended up being a blowout with that crazy home court and all the momentum swinging Boston's direction. So going into this year, Wes, my thought is it's tough to give the Celtics the benefit of the doubt come playoff time over Miami, even with the changes they made. And I'll get your thoughts on those later. But also considering that Damian Lillard could be joining this team by playoff time too. So we know the deal at this point. Nothing that happens in the regular season matters in Miami. Once they get into the playoffs, it's going to be a whole different conversation. And that's probably more true than ever this year because they lost some key guys. It's probably going to take a while to sort out this Lillard situation. And they've now defeated the Celtics in 2 of the last 3 East Finals they faced in and almost had them in the third. So you got to give Miami, even if you don't go into the season saying that they're the favorite, and you probably shouldn't, the benefit of the doubt that they could get hot at the right time late, beat the Celtics at the very least, and we'll see from there.
I'm I guess surprised to hear you say that because I still don't think
I've been traumatized by a couple of East Finals.
I don't know that I would even say that the Miami Heat should be considered favorites in the East. You know what I mean? And
No, they shouldn't be. I'd say over the Celtics in a series.
I see what you mean. Well, in that case, I mean, look, the Miami Heat are sort of the Boston Celtics boogeyman, right? Like, there's not. They seem to get in their heads, you know. And it's interesting, the whole Marcus Smart thing. People are like understandably concerned, like he was the heart and soul of the team. He was the tough guy, the whole thing. Like, if you lose him, you know, where are you kind of getting that edge from? And I guess my counterpoint to that has been for a couple months now. It's like, well, it hasn't really helped them win the championship. You know what I mean? Like, if on one hand, Boston's problem is that they're a little soft when, you know, on the biggest stage. The other thing can't also be true. It's like, well, they're kind of soft, but the heart and soul of the team is gone. It's like, well, if the heart and soul of the team is soft, then it shouldn't really matter if the tough guy is gone, because obviously he wasn't tough enough. I know that's like kind of distilling it down a little bit too much, but I am curious to see how Marcus Smart leaving forces Tatum and Jaylen Brown to take on more of a like leadership roles in that locker room and see if it changes the personality, which again, talent has never been Boston's issue, whether or not it's toughness, softness, whatever it is. Again, that stuff is so overstated and binary. They just needed a change. And I think that like getting Kristaps Porzingis is obviously a big part of that trade, but I think a big part of that trade too was just sort of challenging Tatum and Brown to be the leaders that they didn't really have to be. They could just sort of do the scoring and all the stuff that they do so well and leave all the leadership stuff to Marcus Smart and whoever was the head coach. Now it kind of puts the onus on them to step up in that way.
Yeah, and you said everything I've said pretty much since the trade happened. This is a move to force Brown and Tatum to step into those leadership roles. If you were going to make a change at some point that didn't involve Brown or Tatum, it probably had to be Smart, and you never would have known what would happen if you never did it. Especially before making a move on Brown, which, you know, we'll get to in the coming years based on how things go this year. But you got a lot back for Smart looking back on it. And I don't love the move. I do think the leadership and intangible issues might be in other places here. We'll see. Again, it's on Brown and Tatum to finally lead this team where it needs to go now at this point. There's really no other excuse left. They've messed with everything else, the coach, the Smart, all the way down the line. They've gotten them role players. Now they've gotten them a third star. So this is a huge year for them. There's no doubt about it. But I do worry a little bit about what taking Smart out of the room does, at least in terms of accountability for this group, judging on how Joe coached his team last year. And maybe he'll make some adjustments going in. I'm very interested to just see the whole demeanor of this team and how they're looking at this team come this season come media day. But for Porzingis specifically, and I guess we'll start out with the Celtics, I watched a lot of film on him this summer, And I especially watched a lot of film of him against the Heat for obvious reasons. And the numbers weren't great, especially the shooting numbers in those games. But just looking at the film, there was some interesting stuff he did against them. And obviously, he had a great post-up season, great season inside the arc. The mid-range with him is just about as good as the three. But the Wizards did some good stuff in terms of getting him the ball inside, having him make quick decisions against the zone. And of course, that middle area is with a big guy who can see over the defense, and all of that is kind of what you want against a Heat zone defense that has really challenged the Celtics offense in recent years. And it's obviously just another guy that you have to account for on this offense that can be pretty explosive for Boston.
Yeah, Boston's bigs haven't really given Miami any problems over the last couple of years.
They don't score.
And Porzingis, to your point, the numbers haven't been good. They weren't good for the Wizards, but the Wizards weren't good. So, it's like which one? It's like chicken or the egg type deal.
Yeah.
Porzingis on paper is sort of a problem for the Heat for all the reasons you already laid out. And then just in a vacuum, I thought Porzingis played the best basketball of his career last season. It wasn't as loud and as big as his days when he was playing at Madison Square Garden, obviously, but I thought he was making quick decisions. I thought defensively he was as good as he's ever been. Again, like so many blocked shots and stuff like that when he played for the Knicks, but just like positional defense, it was better last year than it had been in any other point of his career. I spoke with him last year for a feature I wrote on him too, and he felt the same way. And he felt like if his numbers, like you said, the shooting numbers were sort of up and down. And he said that. He's like, if I can just get the shooting to where I know I can get it, like just watch my game take off, I think I could be an all-star again. And I think I agree with him. It kind of feels like the injury issues are a little bit behind him now. And with his size and he's a good shooter. He's got that ability. And when the decision making gets better and he's better at like kind of putting the ball on the floor and just driving, he doesn't necessarily have to dunk. He doesn't have to do anything flashy, but he could just kind of be a 3 and at the rim kind of guy offensively. The post up stuff you already mentioned is pretty good. I don't know if it's that might be his career best last year, but it's still going to be pretty good in terms of his numbers. And then defensively, I think he's really solid. And you pair him with a guy like Al Horford or Robert Williams or whatever they end up doing in the front court. You can obviously play KP at the 5 if you want to and go smaller. I really like that move for Boston. I liked it right away. I actually don't worry about losing Marcus Smart at all. And as from the Heat's perspective, I think you've got to be a little bit worried about how well balanced that roster is, and maybe that makeup change. It's like, okay, like we kind of knew what this thing was. We kind of had their number for the last couple of years. Is this going to make it that much different? It's just you got to approach with a little bit more caution, I think, if you're the Miami Heat than you did in the past. I still think that at the end of the day, they've got Jimmy Butler, they've got the DNA, and they've got like the stuff that has given Boston problems. And I probably still would take Miami in a series, to your point, if we're talking about playoff series. But I don't know. I think the Celtics will be better. I do.
They should be if they're healthy. And that's probably the largest concern here is the health factor with him. I don't know what he told you on the health front, when you talked to him about last year and just how...
He said the same thing every player says. I feel great. My body's never been better.
And it was true for him last year. He played a lot compared to
60-something games, right?
65, yeah. The All-NBA rule, we can call it the Porzingis.
Yeah, the Porzingis line.
And he hasn't been an all-star either, so they can actually rest him with this new rule here, which helps them. They get the interchangeable bigs. There's definitely balance, as you say there. We'll see what happens with Brogdon. That's a conversation for another day in terms of his health and where he's at coming into the season. But for Porzingis specifically, the health does concern me, but the play last year, as you said, the shooting was just awesome. I've looked up a couple times last year, and he obviously destroyed Boston in that late game between the Wizards and Celtics. It was just amazing how devastating he was offensively in that game with no one really around him. I think Beal and Kuzma were out in that game. But I looked up a couple times last year, and you mentioned him getting back to all-star status. He was really close to that All-NBA spot on the third, if you look at it. Sabonis deserved it. When you just stack things up there. But if there was a fourth team, Porzingis would have had that center spot. He'll probably have a pretty good spot at getting it this year. But you do go from being the guy on a team to being the third option here and spotting up a lot. And I was going through some quotes of Joe Mazzulla when they got him. And I don't know if he just kind of said this casually and didn't really mean it, but he talked about them using him the same way they did Horford, which is mostly spotting up from 3. And, you know, if he's going to hit a ton of threes at a high volume, that's going to help this team. But there is also a vast array of things he can give a team when we mention the post-ups, when we mention the mid-range with him, that you'd like to see help diversify this offense a little bit, because we saw it in game 6 and 7 against Miami. They had their 2 worst shooting nights of the season, and that was pretty much the season for them. They come away with the putback in game 6, but in game 7, they're even colder, I think. They were in the low 20s from 3 that night, and that was it for them. They really didn't have alternatives of places they could go on the floor outside of some Jalen mid-rangers, and the Heat obviously were turning up the heat on Jalen's dribble in that series.
That's, I mean, they literally said, like, they know he can't go left. So,
yeah.
And look, the scouting report on Jaylen Brown has been out there. We'll see if that can improve. He still just seems so mechanical as a ball handler. And that's the thing that gives me worry. It's this idea that it's like, who's the table setter on that offense? I think Porzingis can do a little bit of that. You mentioned before, like having a guy who's like 7'3" out there who can just sort of like lay the ball down where it needs to go to his teammates is really helpful. But I also don't see them using him as like Nikola Jokic, you know, or even like the way that Miami uses Bam Adebayo, because the ball has to be in Jason Tatum's hands so much, and obviously Jaylen Brown's hands too. Like, does Tatum take that next step? Can he develop some real pick and roll chemistry with anybody on the team? Because it hasn't really happened with Rob Williams or Horford as a pick and pop guy, or KP as maybe it's going to be with Porzingis as a pick and pop and a pick and roll guy, because he could do both. That to me is where my biggest concern is for the Celtics. But again, like, they weren't really getting that from Marcus Smart. That was always sort of something Marcus Smart had to try to do that was out of his comfort zone. He wasn't even in Oklahoma State, he wasn't really like a ball handling, set the table point guard. So I don't know that they made any, additions that can help that, but it's just, like, to me, it keeps going back to, do you change the internal chemistry and just the whole morale and all of that stuff in the locker room? And does that lead to just some other sparks on the floor where Tatum's all of a sudden like, you know what? I'm going to be the guy who sets the table for everybody. I'm going to try to make my game a little bit more LeBron and a little bit less Durant, or something like that. And that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, and I thought Smart did a better job with it than people gave him credit for. I think he was the best passer on the team. Now, certainly a team that had its turnover issues and facilitating problems, as you say there. They weren't in a great place with it, so it makes sense to shake it up. And they didn't necessarily get a replacement, as you say, in terms of the passing, but Derek White, with what he does overall, I think made them comfortable with making that move. And he had a better season last year. There's really no argument there. And they'll have to make a decision on his contract too pretty soon here. So you want to give him that full shot, especially with the playoffs he had. I mean, he shot close to 40% for the whole season from 3, and like 800 shots between the regular and postseason. So he, great sample there of him hitting threes effectively. He can screen, he can pass, he can make quick decisions. He doesn't turn the ball over really ever. I think he's got some of the lowest turnover numbers in the league among guys at that position. So I feel good about that. Again, with Smart, it's the intangibles. And that's really what it's been with this team. As you said, well, they've had the talent in recent years. You're really just stacking in another scorer with Porzingis, one who can do it a bunch of different ways, but not really a guy who impacts the facilitating at all. So that, to me, is why I have a little bit of a pause on this solving everything for them. It definitely follows the line of thinking with this coaching staff, which is really emphasizing the three-point shot, getting quick, high-quality shots off to solve some of those turnover issues, rather than just having this point guard who's going to command everything, knowing where the spots are on the floor to be. He can probably stagger into some of those second units too with Brown, and just targeting him, I think, will make reads easier for Brown too. There's a lot on paper that makes sense here. It's just how it's going to play out in reality, how the health's going to go, and how internally they come together, especially in the bad moments. I mean, you remember game 3, and I hope they do too. It was chaotic. The post game, where they were in that series, even the day after, where everyone's just trying to place blame and figure out where things went wrong. And they turned it around, to their credit, in a massive way. But, Gabe Vincent went down in the next game. That was a big factor there. The game 6 obviously was a miracle. So it was a little fluky how they came back too.
It was. Look, but I still think at the end of the day, I don't think that Boston solved everything by any stretch, right? Here, I still have the same concerns that you have with them, but like it's fascinating to me that it's just been the Heat and the Celtics for 3 of the last 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously the Bucks won a championship in between all of that, but those are the 3. Like those are the 3 in the Eastern Conference for right now. And it just seems
Knicks
like
lurk a little bit. Knicks
who?
lurking a little
The
bit.
Knicks lurking? The Knicks are, I mean, I guess.
They gave the Celtics a tough time last year. That would have been a tough East Finals too for Boston.
Okay. I mean, look, they played Miami hard.
Yeah.
The Knicks, I don't know. It feels like they're definitely a tier below the other 3, right?
That Randall thing kills them because you just know what he's going to be in the playoffs.
Well, you already know he had the best regular season of his career 2 years after having the best regular season of his career, and the thing that always happens is after his career best season, he follows it with a disappointing season. So it's like I'm a little actually worried about Knicks regression if I was a Knicks fan right now.
Yeah,
But
Cleveland. I'd probably put Cleveland above them.
I like Cleveland.
Philly. It's
Who knows?
impossible to imagine how that's going to go.
Yeah, I have no idea. I've always been kind of bullish on the Sixers. I'm like, yeah, they got to figure it out at some point. It's sort of just been my stance this entire time, but now I've just totally given up on them. Just like the Clippers, like both of those teams, I'm like, you know what? When you win a championship, I'll think about believing in you as a championship contender.
All right, let's get to Lillard. We just want to give a shout out to our sponsor real quick here, and we're going to talk about when the hell Lillard's going to end up in Miami.
Wish you could navigate the betting field with the confidence of a pro? Enter Odds Are. They're not a sports book, but they're the sports betting advisor you always needed. It's like having a playbook for smarter bets right in your pocket. I've been absolutely loving the experience, and I think you will too, especially since Celtics All Access listeners get a 30-day free trial. Elevate your game day and join the smart betting revolution. Go get it at oddsr.com/Celtics. That's oddsr.com/Celtics.
All right. So I saw you tweet earlier, and I think this is pretty much how everyone feels, that this Lillard thing is just at a standstill, and the Heat probably won't have him in camp. Who knows when he's going to be there? He still wants to be there. He's still sending those signals left and right, even though the NBA tried to shut it down a little bit with the warning there of him trying to dictate one destination only from Portland. Who knows if they really even want to trade him? I think that's probably a mistake on their part. And honestly, I started this whole process, Wes, saying, just like everybody else, that Heat offer's terrible. They got to be able to do better than that. Portland does. Maybe this doesn't even happen for Miami. But the more and more I think about it, and the more it seems like the NBA at large doesn't seem interested in trading for him, and he keeps threatening that you don't want me if you're not the Heat. That Heat offer, if the Heat get very aggressive here, and I know they can only be so aggressive with how much they give up here and still have a team, it's acceptable. That's probably the word I'd use for it. It's okay. It's acceptable. I just think Portland, more than anything else, needs to move on from this and take what they can get. Maybe it's as many Heat picks as possible, even if the Heat, you don't think in the future are going to be a team that has a downturn. Maybe you can figure out what you're doing with Hero at some point down the line. If you're them, you're rebuilding. It really doesn't matter how many guys you have at a certain position. I'm just leaning toward wanting to see this get done, obviously, as I'm sure a lot of people in Miami do.
I mean, yeah, we just want to see it get done. I want to see it get done because I'm sick of talking about hypotheticals. Like,
yeah, that's how I feel.
It's just so funny. Like, people online and on podcasts like us talk about this more than the Heat and the Blazers have talked about this, clearly, because they haven't spoken since July. But look, I agree with you. I think there's a number of factors here that kind of influenced our thinking on the trade package. The first one being is that the closest star trade to this was Kevin Durant getting traded a few months ago. I mean, closest in terms of timeline was Kevin Durant a few months ago. And so Kevin Durant gets traded. Before that, it was Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. And these teams get such huge hauls for these big names, right? For huge names in the NBA. And Damian Lillard is a star among stars, right? Damian Lillard is a star like Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, like LeBron. Like, he has been in the league and just one of the many faces of the NBA for the last decade. And so you see him get on the trade market finally, right? As, again, a guy that we've been thinking about could be traded at any moment, any offseason. You see him finally get on the market and demand that trade that everybody has been anticipating him to make. And you say, okay, all right, Blazers, they're rebuilding. They're going to get a huge haul for him. And then you kind of think about it a little bit more. He's not a big wing. He's 33 years old. He's a smallish guard. He doesn't fit with every roster just on a position basis, because we already saw what happens if you pair him with another small guard, you don't win at a high level. They tried to do it in Portland with CJ McCollum and Anthony Simons, and it just didn't work. So you're like, okay, so if we're already kind of committed to a small guard, we can't really do it with Dame. And then obviously he's going to be 33 by the time the season starts. He's making a ton of money that is going to be hard to get out of as he gets older. You kind of start going down the list of teams that make any sense for Damian Lillard, and you're like, Miami might be the only team, right? It's not that he only forced his way to Miami and now Miami is the only team, right? It's that Miami was kind of always the only team that made any sense. And now that's probably even more so that Joel Embiid and Giannis could potentially get traded in the next 12 months. Like, if I'm Brooklyn, there's no way I'm trading for Damian Lillard, right? If it means that I have to give up the assets it would take to maybe go get Giannis in 9 months from now. So it's like, I just think it makes more and more sense. So I think that's one factor. The other factor of this too is that Tyler Hero is a really good player. And his trade value has been kind of dragged through the mud over this offseason, and this idea that, okay, maybe Portland will find a third team to flip Tyler Hero to for a first-round pick. I'm just going to use Brooklyn again because I said them and they're at the top of my mind. Let's say you trade Tyler Hero, you flip him to Brooklyn for first round. What's that first-round pick going to be from Brooklyn? Like 22? Like, would you really have the 22nd pick over Tyler Hero, sixth man of the year?
Well, Brooklyn doesn't have their own picks, which is the problem.
Okay, but you know what I mean. Like, any team trading for Tyler Hero, like, you're not getting like, I mean, you're probably a close to contending team. You're trying to get Tyler Hero as like another piece to try to get to where you're trying to go.
Yeah.
Like a team that's going to be picking the lottery isn't necessarily trading for Tyler Hero. So you're going to get some late mid first round pick. That's not better than Tyler Hero in terms of value in a vacuum. And like, look, if Tyler Hero was 3 inches taller, we're not even having this conversation. He'd be playing small forward and playing for Portland, and this trade would have been done 2 months ago. But he's a good player, and I think it's worth getting him. And if you can get Tyler Hero, again, 24 years old, literally has improved every single season, 20 points per game in the last 2 seasons, 6th man of the year 2 seasons ago. A lot left to explore in his game, plus 3 first-round picks in the distant future when Jimmy Butler's not going to be Jimmy Butler, when Damian Lillard's not going to be Damian Lillard. Like, I think those picks could actually be pretty good in 2028 and 2030 if you're Miami. And this idea that, oh, the Heat are never bad, like those picks will never be worth anything. The Heat are never like the Heat won the lottery like 2 years in a row after LeBron left. Like, the Heat aren't somehow magically not allowed to be in the lottery. They could be in the lottery. That's where they got Bam, and it's where they got Tyler Hero, and they got Justice Winslow in the lottery as well. So they picked in the lottery 3 times in the last 10 years. So I think the offer's okay for an aging point guard making $200+ million over the next 4 years. Like, that's just what it is.
To bring up the Durant comparison again, looking back on it, it's amazing how it panned out for Nets there. They get many distant Suns picks, which, as far as distant picks go, you can almost assure those are going to be good, where most of the time you're uncertain of how it's going to go down the line, but they probably won't have those aging stars there anymore. They don't have any picks for the foreseeable future, first or second round. And they really don't have any young guys coming up either. It's just a bunch of veterans on minimum deals. So those are the premium there. Miami, you could say, like, they'll have some young guys coming up the pipeline, whether it's premium guys or younger guys, all the rest. But, you're comparing it to, I don't even know if the Nets get involved, as you said. I think they should, just because they don't have their first, just because they don't really have a direction here. They might not even make the playoffs this year with what they have right now. I think the Raptors are in a similar boat. But the packages are comparable.
But the thing that I keep coming back to as well is, like, did we all agree that the Timberwolves overpaid for Rudy Gobert? Yeah. Did we all agree that Cleveland might have overpaid for Donovan Mitchell? Yeah. After the season Larry Markkinen had. Did we all agree that the Suns probably overpaid even for Kevin Durant? Yes. So you can't have it both ways. Like, we can't say, like, okay, all these teams overpaid for these stars, but then Portland should get what those other teams got for those stars, as if the other teams in the league didn't look at, like, okay, maybe we're overpaying for stars now, right? Because the whole idea isn't to get Damian Lillard. That's not the goal of the trade. The goal is to win a championship, right? And so if you're any team looking to trade for Damian Lillard, you got to make sure that whatever team you have after a Lillard trade could still contend for a championship. And as good as Lillard and Jimmy Butler and Bam might be as a trio, you got to have like 7 guys that you could trust in the playoffs. And if you just give up everything, then I don't know that you have that if you're Miami. And so understandably, you'd be like, well, we're just not going to trade for him, because you could argue also that, okay, I might rather have this Heat roster than a Heat roster with Damian Lillard and none of the supporting role players that are going to help us win a championship.
Yeah, and you can hold those pieces going forward for maybe Giannis becomes available, maybe Embiid becomes available. And that is what worries me from a Celtics perspective, is maybe the Heat's pieces get better, maybe this Lillard trade doesn't go through, and then next year you're talking about, the Heat are in on Embiid, because then you can even offer Bam at that point. If you want to swap out centers. So that's quietly what I'm thinking about on the backdrop, and that's obviously a conversation for later. But just with what Miami has right now, you have to think Jovic would go in this deal. Jaquez.
He's improved his trade value a lot in that World Cup.
I liked his World Cup run, and I don't know if he's ready to play a big NBA role right now, but again, Portland's not in a hurry here.
Portland would be perfect for him too, because in Miami it's a little bit tough because they're obviously trying to win right now, and I think Jovic needs probably a couple of NBA years of seasoning, but Portland could give him that, and he plays a position of need for them.
So that's what's tough for me now with Miami, because given Butler doesn't play a ton, and I think Vincent was just a massive loss. He was actually legitimately great for them in a year where Lowry was in and out of the lineup. It could be a tough regular season for Miami with what they have right now. Again, is Jovic ready? Not sure. Jaquez seems ready to go relatively for a rookie, but you never know. Strus, I don't think was a huge loss. I think that's a guy who you could probably replace, especially with Hero coming back, who's underrated, stepping back into this lineup, I think, a little bit now. So I don't know, like this could be a tough stretch here without Lillard, especially considering just a year ago when they had all these guys, the Heat were hovering around an 8 seed, and we were doing a show saying this team's done going into the playoffs.
We were. Yeah, I think I agree with you. The fun part about trading for Damian Lillard, again, depending on what it would cost you, is that it would make the regular season a lot more enjoyable. For me, that's mostly what I'm looking forward to, because that's the most immediate thing. It's like, if this is the team coming back, man, like this is the same team basically for 3 years in a row. You take a Gabe Vincent and a Max Strus out, you add a Josh Richardson here back into the mix, like whatever, like you get a better year from Duncan Robinson. Like it's tough sledding. It's a team that wins by playing good defense and boxing out a lot. And that's not necessarily an enjoyable version of basketball. And it's a hard way to play for 82 games. It's really, really hard. And like you mentioned, Jimmy Butler played like 60-something games for the first time in his Miami Heat career last year. And they needed him to make the playoffs. Like literally, they made the playoffs by one quarter against the Chicago Bulls in the play-in tournament. That's what made them get into the playoffs. So you also look at their three-point shooting last year was way down. They were like bottom 5 in the league in three-point shooting percentage, versus the year before when they were the number 1 seed, they were the number 1 team in the league in three-point percentage. I think they're closer to, in terms of three-point percentage, where they were 2 years ago than they were last year, where a bunch of guys just had career lows. I think Duncan Robinson, Josh Richardson, Caleb Martin, like Tyler Hero, these guys are all good to elite three-point shooters, and I think they all have bounce-back years. Max Strus and Gabe Vincent weren't good from 3 in the regular season, and they've kind of been up and down throughout their careers. Like I think Max Strus is a good three-point shooter. I don't think he's like an elite three-point shooter. You know what I mean? So, and I think Duncan Robinson is a better three-point shooter. So with Strus gone, you get to play Duncan Robinson more. So I think their three-point shooting goes up. We've seen that help offenses obviously score and help teams win games in the regular season. That's a very important stat for them. But then, so yeah, I think there's going to be a reversion back to the mean that's going to help the Heat in the regular season this year, even if they don't make a Damian Lillard change. The other thing that I look at with the Heat over the last 4 years is that year that they had the number 1 seed was clearly the anomaly. Even the bubble year, they won.
So like crazy. I think they were 1.
They were the 1 seed in that crazy COVID season, which the Heat were uniquely suited to win games in, because it's like, oh, you have to play a bunch of guys from your G League team and your two-way contracts. Well, that's kind of who we use anyway, because we're the Miami Heat. Those are all of our dudes. So they just like they were very much in their comfort zone to do that, and they won a bunch of games when like we had that other wave of COVID in December and January.
The craziest time ever, where Joe Johnson's playing for the Celtics, and
oh my god, I forgot about that.
everyone's wondering who they can call up to take
Kyle Guy stepped in and scored like 32 points or something for the Heat on New Year's Eve or something. And everybody's like, oh my God, like, how do they find this guy? And then they waive him like 2 weeks later. And you're just like, all right, that's the Kyle Guy experience. But yeah, it was so crazy. But yeah, I just think that the Heat are sort of a slightly above 500 team in the regular season that made a run in the bubble, and they made a run last year. And as the number 1 seed 2 years ago, we're on the doorstep of the NBA Finals after losing before losing the Game 7 against Boston. So this is an okay regular season team that can turn it on in the playoffs. I don't think you can count them out in any postseason by any stretch, but that doesn't mean that the regular season is really hard. And this idea that the Heat figured out that the regular season doesn't matter and that they were just saving it for the postseason. They did not want to be down to the Chicago Bulls in the second game of the play-in tournament, facing elimination going into the fourth quarter. They did not want to lose all the games that they won in that they lost in the regular season. Excuse me. They would much rather 2 years ago cruising in as the number 1 seed. Trust me. Okay, that's still the goal. It's why they want Damian Lillard, but mostly they want Damian Lillard to win a championship.
Do you think the deal gets done? And
yes.
When could that be?
I think a deal gets done. I think it happens. I think it happens in early October. It's just going to be my guess. I don't know. Or maybe never. I have no idea, Bobby. I really don't. I'm going to say it happens in early October because you asked me, and I'm going to give you an answer. But it's interesting that the reports lately are like, oh yeah, there hasn't been any conversations for months. And it's just sort of like every report is still kind of a report because you got to think like, okay, where does that report come from? Some reporter on ESPN asked somebody in Portland, hey, when was the last time you talked to the Heat? And they're like, the Heat who? I don't know.
Yeah.
And then you're asking Miami, when was the last time you talked to Portland? And you're like, they won't return our calls. We haven't talked to them since July, but the other part of that means that these teams are back in the office. They're back in their facilities. Off-season vacations are over. And now they're at least thinking about stuff. And I do think that just like anything, deadlines matter. It's why trades get done in the first week of February and not the first week of November. Deadlines matter. You got to get them done. I think that media day is going to be a mess if you have to have Damian Lillard there. If you're Portland, I don't know that that's a motivator for you to get a deal done just to avoid like awkwardness with local beat reporters, but it's not great. And I think once he's in the building, you're just like, this kind of doesn't make any sense for us. Like, and there's obviously no deals out there. Let's just go ahead and trade this guy for the most that we can get and re-engage with the Miami Heat and trade talks and just get the best thing we can get.
I want to talk a little bit too about what this would look like if it does get done. But first, another great sponsor here, Fanduel.
To action this NFL season with Fanduel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
All right, so what does this look like when it gets done? Lillard, Butler, Bam. Obviously, an infusion of offense this team is needed for a little bit while here, being a more defensively oriented team. I think the guy you probably want to have in that mix too probably is Martin, the way his postseason went last year. It's a thinner team. You're probably looking for some veterans or maybe even small trade additions to pad the depth around this thinner group, but these top-heavy, big three, star-laden teams are kind of the ones that have gotten it done in the NBA over the last decade or two here. So I understand wanting to go in that direction, but you also have 2 ball handlers and 1 ball, and that's always a challenge too here. So what does this look like once Lillard arrives?
Obviously, it depends on what you have to send out, but I have reported this, and I feel very strongly about this still, that the Heat would very much prefer to keep Caleb Martin out of any Damian Lillard trade, right? Like they want him, they view him as a key piece in any sort of championship contender that they're trying to build. So and by the way, I don't think Portland is like super stoked about trading for like acquiring Caleb Martin. I don't think that they would draw the line in the sand there. Like he's 28 years old. He's got a year left on his contract basically because of the player option. They basically have to pay him. Like it doesn't make sense for their timeline anyway. I don't know that he has a ton of trade value on the market either. So it's like, okay, like I don't know that they're gonna like stall trade talks further because of him. So we'll see what happens there. But if let's just say it's like hero draft picks and like one of the young guys, let's just call it Jovic. Like let's just say that that's the deal, right? And you can even throw Hawkes in there if you want. I don't know how much of a factor he'll play this season as a rookie anyway. But you've got Lillard. I think I like Josh Richardson as your starting 2 guard. He's just like a plug and play kind of Contavious
You guys
Caldwell
forgotten a
Pope
little
type
bit
deal.
as a pickup. I forgot about him. They ended up.
You got him
there.
at the minimum. Like I think those are pickups that really matter. And so it reminds me a lot of like when Golden State got Otto Porter a couple of years ago, and he ends up playing like a real rotation role for them in the playoffs. And they obviously
Celtics fans miss Richardson a little bit, even though White comes back in that deal, and Richardson's just been on bad teams since. He had a nice little run to start that season here.
And he's a career 36% 3-point shooter on high volume, which I think is really important for Miami. So, and he could defend multiple positions. So I like him next to Dame in that backcourt. Obviously, you need a little bit of a bigger defensive-minded guard to pair with Damian Lillard. So I'd go Lillard, Richardson, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo at the 5. Who knows who starts at power forward? I still think the inside. I think Kevin Love has the advantage there, at least to start games at power forward. Even if it's just like the first 5 minutes of each half, first 6 minutes of each half, like maybe that's all it is. But I think he still has the inside track to start there. And then if you're able to keep Caleb Martin, he's a good player coming off the bench. I think Duncan Robinson is in for a bounce back year. They signed Thomas Bryant over the offseason, which is, I think, an interesting little high, like low risk, high payoff type of move for them. They also have Orlando Robinson, who's a little bit more solid defensively to back up Bam Adebayo at center.
They also brought over Champagnie from the Celtics.
Yeah.
Trying to pull a guy in who was there all last year.
A bunch of interesting names in training camp who could pop, right? And I think most of Miami's 2-way contracts are very much up for grabs here. So any one of those guys can end up popping for Miami this year. And now you have another factor that you've got to consider. Haywood Highsmith could be a guy who I think can
played well in those spot playoff minutes.
If he can get that 3-point corner, the corner 3 to fall at like a 35% clip, he could end up starting for the Heat at power forward. Like that would not shock me. So they got some names here. You mentioned like how that big 3 model has worked. In the playoffs, you really only need 6 guys.
Yeah.
Like when it really comes down to it, like you would prefer to have 7 or 8, but you really only need 6. And we didn't even see, like, we don't think about the Denver Nuggets as some sort of like top heavy team, but they very much are. Like they are a top heavy team. They have 5 good starters, right? They have like 4. They have 2 elite players in Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. You've got 2 very good players in Michael Porter Jr. And Aaron Gordon. And then you've got like an above average to good player in KCP who fits his role perfectly. And then off the bench last year, it was like Bruce Brown. And then every once in a while, like Christian Brown could do something, maybe Jeff Green over here in this matchup. But basically, Bruce Brown was the only guy who they could rely on from series to series, from playoff game to playoff game. You really only need 6. Mm-hmm. And then hopefully and then you could find like 2 other guys on matchup based who make sense for that series. And Eric Spoelstra is as good as that as anybody in the league. So I think if you're able to keep 6 guys who you could trust in every playoff game, that would be enough if I'm Miami to make sure that I'm keeping. And that's why I think they want to keep Caleb Martin so badly.
They should. And you mentioned Love too. That gives you a little bit of a ability to mix bigger and smaller lineups, because the Celtics are going to come in bigger to a series this year between, I think, Robin Porzingis will probably be the way to go to start games, but you have Horford there too, who's obviously more of a spot-up guy now. It is a challenge for the Heat when you look at what the Celtics bring to the table there. But if Lillard is in the mix, do you think that puts them up there at the top of East teams with the mix that you talked about there?
If they're able to get Lillard at what Pat Riley would like to get Lillard for, I will.
It's a scary thought for Boston. It is.
I'll probably make them my finals pick. That's probably where I'll end up.
He was amazing last year, and I know it's on a bad team and taking all those shots, but he got back to that level Lillard was at. I mean, I even, going back to those Brown conversations before he got extended, I thought about it just because of how great he's been in the playoffs, how awesome he is as a ball handler, controlling things, and maybe setting the table for this offense, taking pressure off Tatum.
He's literally perfect for Miami. I mean, he is a hand in glove fit. They need 3-point shooting, deep 3-point shooting, like 3-point shooting that scares the crap out of opponents. Damian Lillard is the closest thing to Steph Curry outside of the Bay Area. Like that's it. Nobody's scarier from 30 feet out than Damian Lillard, again, other than Steph. So you get him, and I think the pick and roll between him and Bam would click right away. They're perfect fits for each other. Bam is like that ball handling center screen setter. He might be the best screen center in the NBA. Celtics fans would say he's probably the dirtiest screen setter in the NBA. Whichever, hey, you got the job. However you got to get the job done, you do it, man. And so, I like you have him setting screens for Dame, and then being able to incorporate like the dribble handoff stuff that Damian Lillard's never had a real guy. Like Nurkic he dabbled with it a little bit, but not to the level of Bam. And then on the flip side of that, Lillard being able to create space for Bam and Jimmy Butler. And Jimmy Butler, just for the entire regular season, just be able to stand in the dunker spot and just like cut off of Damian Lillard, Bam Adebayo pick and rolls. Like that would be a blessing for Jimmy Butler because then he could stay fresh for the playoffs where he could do Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, they need to take some pressure off him for sure.
It's huge.
This is a great guy to do it with. And they're well equipped to handling the defensive liability there. They really can be, especially the way they've handled Robinson and Hero and those types. So it is a great fit. I think the personality fits. He obviously really wants to be there, which has been a challenge for this whole process for Portland. But I think Celtics fans everywhere, I remember second round, they get through past the Bucks, and I'm like, all right, that Heat anxiety is beginning a little bit, and then even to start the series. But I'm still blown away by just how much they dominated those first two games in Boston. And then, of course, the third game is still shocking to look back on there. So Celtics need to shake it up. They made their big move. I think Porzingis does fit in well against this Miami team, but Lillard will be a challenge to handle for Boston's defensive backcourt too. I think you could be looking at another East Finals between these teams somehow, some way, and I'm ready for it. You mentioned the screening too. That was one of the funnier parts of that series was the anger back and forth over Bam and Horford screens.
It's the best part about the Heat Celtics rivalry is the fact that we actually kind of get into the basketball parts of it, right? It's always like his screen setting is dirty, and now we're like talking about whether or not his feet are set, or if those elbows are flared or whatever.
Well, because it's so evenly matched by the end of it, going down to 7 games.
Exactly.
Really close finish last year, the 2023
We're talking about
one.
Jaylen Brown, like what direction he's best dribbling in. Like that's actual basketball. Like it's inflamed by, passion of fan bases and the Boston versus Miami rivalry. That does not just exist in the NBA, right? Like the Dolphins and the Patriots, like it's the same fan base that hates each other in all sports. So it's just like, but at the end of the day, it's still like analysis of the basketball game and which team has the advantage where. So if it's another Eastern Conference Finals, I'll be stoked.
So the last question I got for you here before we send you out of here, and it's a distant one, but it's one that does loom here for the Heat. Are they going to pay Butler $300 million?
If they get Damian Lillard, no doubt they'll pay Jimmy Butler
at 35.
I think that they probably would. I just don't know what the other option is now. The only thing that's looming for me in terms of the Jimmy Butler decision is if they could promise Jimmy that it would be easier with the second, with the CBA and the second apron and all this stuff. If they're able to break it down math wise with Jimmy, hey man, like, look, we're going to give you as much money as we can, but this is what we have planned for the roster to go like win more championships. I think there's a chance that Jimmy would take less in order to facilitate something like that. And again, what the new CBA gives them is like hard and fast stuff. Like, hey, if we give you this, we can't aggregate these players to do this trade that we think we can accomplish a month from now or whatever it is, right? Where in the past with the CBA, it was like, hey, we really don't want to pay you this much because we just don't want to pay this much. Like now there's like actual rules to prevent teams from paying players, which is why, by the way, the owners did this in the first place. But that would be the only thing I would say is as Jimmy and Damian Lillard potentially age, if there's a chance for them to complement them and sort of revamp the roster around them. And if what that means is that they have to pay Jimmy Butler a little bit less, I think Jimmy would be open to it is all I would say.
What do you think of the Brown deal?
Good for Jaylen Brown, man. Go get your money. That's what it is. Enjoy it while you can. Put it on every resume, every cover letter. I'm the highest paid player in NBA history. Do that now because in a few months you won't be. That's just how this works.
It's going to be interesting. Won't last long. Butler's among the guys who can get that kind of deal going forward into the future. And of course, we'll see what happens with the Lillard stuff here. He's Wes Goldberg. You can check him out on the Locked On Heat podcast. And of course at WC Goldberg over on X. And we'll be back later this week potentially, but more likely next week, I think, with a live Garden report. Again, check out CLNSmedia.com for some Rob Al talk. I'm interested in getting into that question here with the guys soon. And thanks again, Wes. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Bobby.
All right. And for everyone else hanging out, check out our great longtime sponsor here, AG1. And we'll catch you. Subscribe, Celtics All Access, CLNS Media, YouTube channels, clnsmedia.com, and over on X at Real Bob Manning. We'll catch you soon. All right, our next partner is AG1, the daily foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health. I drink it every day. 75 high-quality ingredients that give me all the nutrients, energy, focus, strength, and clarity I need every day to hit the ground running. If a comprehensive solution is what you need for your supplement routine, then try AG1. You get a free year supply of vitamin D, 5 free travel packs of AG1 with your first purchase. Just go to drinkag1.com/garden. Make sure you hit that. drinkag1.com/garden. Check it out. That's AG1.